We were apartment kids. No neighborhood, no ranch-style houses tucked neatly into a suburb, with backyard swing sets and grill-out birthday parties. When we went trick-or-treating, it was always in someone else's neighborhood. Because of that and other reasons I'll get to, we made up a haunted house when we were kids. We gave it rules because Patrick said that rules were important for such things. It was kind of a tradition for us, and it was also something that we worked at year-round. Jennifer said that haunted houses, the real ones, never slept. Back then, the four of us and our tight-knit group partly believed in that stuff. Even as we drew pictures and sometimes detailed diagrams of the house's floors and added in new rules or tweaked the ones that we had. Always in Greg's sketchbooks that he kept buying under his parents' noses to feed his unfortunate habit of drawing disturbing images. Even though we made it all up, our excited, serious chatter showed how much we wanted to breathe life into it. Now we're adults. Patrick is a real estate agent. Jennifer is in pre-med at university. Greg works in advertising, and I alternate between construction and retail. It was Patrick who found the house between making his rounds as a real estate agent. I think he had been on his way to show off one of the properties that he was representing when he had spotted the house. He had to come back to it later, when he wasn't being tailed by prospective homeowners. A 5-story Victorian with steep, gabled roofs, conical, tower-like extensions, and large bay windows that were all boarded up. It stuck out like a giant, rotting but elaborate sore thumb, along a neighborhood of smaller houses that Patrick had been driving through to get to another neighborhood. The hedges and lawn were wildly overgrown. Kudzu and other vines clung to the house's siding. But it was something on the front porch that clinched it for Patrick. He went looking for it when he came back. To the right of the door, there were 3 large doll heads that had been slashed open and used as pots for plants. Dingy-looking things bearing fruit that was far too rotted, that it resembled old shoe leather. We had never decided exactly what would be growing there. Lay propped up and dying in those makeshift doll head pots. He sent us pictures. That got us there as soon as our schedules aligned. Patrick had talked with some of his real estate colleague buddies, connections and so on, and had gotten what he needed for permission to access the old house. So, a few weeks later, there we all were, the 4 of us, standing on the lawn of a house that we had sketched up and chatted about for many days as kids, in our rooms while our parents had watched TV, and played cards in the closed confines of our apartment building. "Well, this is something, isn't it?" Jennifer said. "Patrick, I know this is your doing, but wow, you went to some great lengths for this prank. I'm going to just let myself enjoy because you put in so much effort." Patrick shoved his hands in the pockets of his sports coat. His eyes were bloodshot. "Isn't my doing." "Yeah," I said. "This would be an extravagant prank, and for what purpose?" I waited for Patrick to answer, but he just stood there staring at the house. I was thankful that I was wearing jeans and not khaki shorts, because the front lawn was nearly up to our knees. "We should go over the rules again," Greg said. Incredibly, he was carrying a sketchbook in his hands. "Are you insane?" Jennifer said. "You can't think that would matter now." "But what if it does?" Greg said. "What if it matters more now than it did then?" "Unbelievable," Jennifer said. "So, let's go over the rules again," Patrick said glumly. He seemed to be trying to peer into the windows despite their being boarded up. Greg opened the sketchbook that he had been carrying. "Number 1, he said. "Wait, is that one of your sketchbooks from when we were kids?" Greg sneered. "I wish. I think my parents found the old things and threw them away while we were moving out of the apartment. But I remember the rules, more or less, because I read through them so often. So I wrote them down again." The language is a little different now because I'm older and I would like to think wiser, but they should basically be the same. We read through those rules so often, Jennifer said. Together. We all faced the house as Greg went through the rules. Here they are. Rule number 1. Never knock on the front door with your fist. If you want entry to the house, place your right hand on the metal knocker and your left hand over your eyes. If someone is with you, they should be covering their eyes as well. Use the knocker 3 times. Rule number 2. Someone will open the door for you. Keep your eyes closed and covered and count to 3. You don't want to see who opened the door for you. After 3 seconds, you can open your eyes and go inside. But know that in doing so, you are entering into an agreement with the entities in the house. It's a simple agreement. You get to go inside, but they get to harm you if you break the rules. By entering the house, you're giving consent. Rule number 3. Leave any electronic devices in a cubbyhole in the wall near the front door. You can retrieve them if and when you leave. Rule number 4. Walk, but do not run. If you walk, the entities in the house will only walk. If you run, they run, and they will chase after you if you run. They've gotten very fast from chasing people over the years. Rule number 5. On each floor, you must solve a puzzle. If you fail the puzzle or flee the puzzle, the entities will come after you. Successfully solving the puzzle will grant you entry to the stairs. Rule number 6. If you go up the stairs without solving the puzzle or try to go beyond the next floor, Walt, the stairman, will come after you. Walt the stairman is an entity that spends its time devising ways to torture others with stairs. It has gotten creative over the years from the people who have tried to cheat. Rule number 7. There is a treasure at the very top of the house in the attic. This is the reason why you are here now, and why you are going over the rules again. This is the reason you will go inside and risk your lives. The treasure is worth the risk. Jeez, Jennifer said. Is that how we wrote it back then? Greg cleared his throat. Well, basically, I would like to think that my diction is a little better now than it was back then. He laughed, but awkwardly. But did we include that bit about the reason why you're here, now going over the rules again? Jennifer said. I mean, I do remember the treasure and everything. How could we forget about the treasure? I said, chasing it with my own nervous laughter. What I'm saying is, Jennifer went on, it seems like we almost expected ourselves to be here now, going over the rules again. Seems like you may have fudged that part, which makes me think that Greg is in on the prank with Patrick. Bravo, boys, I'm all for it. I don't mind being on the tail end of a prank if it's going to be entertaining. Let's do it. Wait, I said, are we sure we want to do this? What if one of us isn't in on it? We never put much into the puzzles themselves, not the details. They could be anything. You're going to tell me you believe in ghosts, Jennifer said. We never explicitly said whether it was ghosts, I said. Jennifer tilted her head. What are you trying to imply? Spirits, aliens, Scottish house elves in the American Deep South? Maybe, I said. Or maybe it was just someone else. Greg said that his sketchbooks had disappeared. I just think that we should be careful about this. Guys, Greg said, and gal, don't sweat it. I've been thinking about it ahead of time. I typed up a message to send off to some friends. Friends who wouldn't call me a wacko after the fact. It will send automatically in the event that I'm not back to my phone and deleting it by 3 a.m. tomorrow morning. It will also send them to the location of this house. I'm going to leave my phone in the car. Well, if something happens to us before 3 or before your friends get here, I began. I wonder what the treasure could be, Patrick said. Then, so low that I almost couldn't hear him. I'm tired of this rat race. Bravo, Patrick, Jennifer said. Now lead on. It's gonna get dark out here soon, and I would rather get this show on the road while it's still light out. Or show in the house, however you want to put it. We've got puzzles to solve and we've got stairs to climb. Yeah, Pat, Greg said. Just pretend we're some folks looking to buy us a nice, spooky house. Do your thing. We went up the front porch. Its old wood creaked under the collective weight of the four of us. I glanced one at the doll head pots with their dying plants, and I wondered how long they had been dying. Whether or not it was all a hoax, I figured they were probably never alive to begin with. We asked each other if we were all ready. Butterflies in our stomachs, hearts in our throats. Patrick planted himself at the front, put his right hand on the knocker. He nodded at us, and we nodded back. And we covered our eyes. My hand shook over my shut eyes as I waited, as the four of us waited, while Patrick operated the front door's metal knocker. 1, 2, 3 knocks, just like the rule said. While we waited, I was hoping that no one would come to the door, that we would all have a laugh there on the front porch, as whoever was behind this house from our childhood imaginings made real would come forward at the get-go, that we wouldn't have to go inside not knowing what we would find. Maybe I hoped, like a child making a wish with a penny at a shopping mall's fountain. It was some rich benefactor who had built the house for us at Patrick's request, and had somehow made it look very old on the outside. You know, the good kind of surprise. Instead, I could hear the front door opening. My heart flipped and flopped. I thought that I heard breathing, but I couldn't tell if that came from us or whoever had opened the door. 1 Mississippi, Greg was saying aloud. 2 Mississippi. His voice shook. While he was counting, I thought that I heard something like slurred words coming from the doorway, and then it began to sound to me more like language in reverse, like when you play a movie or a record backwards. 3 Mississippi. All right, Jennifer said, hilarity or fear quaking her voice as well. I'm now opening my eyes. I opened mine too. There was no one at the door. Patrick rushed in immediately, and we followed. The lights were already on. A rough-looking chandelier that I vaguely recognized cast a pale yellow light over the foyer. Patrick's head was swiveling around near the entrance. He thrashed a nearby curtain, a potential hiding place. Whoa, Greg said. Whoever it was moved quickly. Or maybe, Jennifer said, the door moved itself. Now, don't start thinking that I'm a believer. It could be some mechanism triggered by the knocker. Patrick, I said, you got some friends with deep pockets. I don't make many friends these days, he said. He was still looking around for whoever had opened the front door for us, checking the closet under the stairs. 3 of my only friends are with me now, if I can still count you as friends. Sure, Pat, Greg said, flipping through his sketchbook, producing a pencil from his pocket, and either sketching or writing some things down. Look at this place, I said. It's just like how we all imagined it when we were kids. I mean, it's all coming back to me now. This is the foyer. It seems to be to scale, or close enough, I guess. Those are these stairs that curve, just like we drew them. And don't step foot on the stairs, guys, Patrick said. Here's that little bench I remember drawing in beneath the mirror, Jennifer said. She moved over to the right. And the mirror, huh? It's wooden frames engraved with a bunch of snakes chasing their own tails. This was my idea. I had forgotten about it, but you remembered. How do you get something like this? Well, I said, if this house continues to be even somewhat remotely based on the floor plans and items that we put in when we were kids, things are going to get pretty kooky. Yeah, Greg said, no kidding. And it had been kids back then, not architects or house decorators, that had come up with this place. Kids obeying the kinds of whims and fancies that they had. The only reason we had ever known about Victorian-style houses and their designs was from books that we had rented from the library to help us along the way. Our primary goal had been to create a scary, dangerous house. That reminded me of something important. We made some traps, I said. Remember? At length, the other three said they did. I can't remember all of them, Patrick said. Neither can I, Greg said. We'll help each other, I said. Together, Jennifer said. We can remember a lot more. I'm still amazed that none of us went right back out the door or even talked about doing so. We hadn't started any of the puzzles yet. We hadn't risked our lives yet like the rules said we would by entering. But the threat was there, and it had begun to magnify as soon as that front door had opened and we had gone inside. We should have been better prepared. I had no holy water, salt, or soap around me. Not that I think it would have mattered. Not that I or my three friends believed in that kind of stuff anymore. But maybe we wanted to believe in that stuff again. Guys, Patrick said. Cubbyhole. It was there to the left of the front door, almost camouflaged with the chipped white paint of the walls. It was surprisingly large enough to accommodate quite a few things. Three of us put our phones in the cubbyhole, Greg having left his in the car. Nobody has any fancy spirit detecting equipment, right? Greg said. No infrared thingamabobs or anything like that, right? If so, please deposit them in the cubbyhole right now. I seem to have left my proton pack at home, Jennifer said, giving me a wink when I looked at her. So, just cell phones, Greg said after we had finished. Glad we came prepared, he joked. Heck, I didn't even think to bring a flashlight. I checked ahead of time, Patrick said. Electricity is running in this place. I didn't go inside until now, but I had an idea the lights might be operational. Who's paying the electricity bill, Pat? Greg said. Don't know. Wasn't able to find that out. Patrick was already moving beyond the foyer. We followed. We were all still joshing around at this point. Well, except for Patrick. But you could tell our nerves were all on fire with fear. No entities yet to speak of, unless they were invisible. I wasn't sure whether which would be scarier, being able to see them or not being able to see them. We moved about the first floor. The foyer passed by the stairs. Next was the parlor, an old-timey and foreign word to us when we were kids, but one that Jennifer had explained to us back then was like a living room for entertaining guests. It had a more formal air than a family's personal living room. So, we had done our best to draw in fancy chairs and cabinets and lights in that room. And there they were. The furnishings were rough despite trying to be fancy. High-backed plush chairs with faded gilding, the cushions falling apart. One large cabinet flared out at the top into a clown's visage, etched in wood. I looked to the right wall of the parlor, noticed the painting on the wall that was a hybrid of Mona Lisa and George Washington, slab dashed together with a heavy dose of Salvador Dali melting clock vibes, but only this time it was the flesh in the face that appeared to be melting off the skull. This was Greg's doing. It looked good, almost professional. Had Greg been that good of an artist back then? And the eyes were hollowed out all the way into the wall it sat upon. It was the classic haunted house portrait, with its eyes hollowed out so someone behind the wall could get a good look at your deal. If there's a technical term for that, I don't know what it is, but I watched the hollowed out eyes closely. Jennifer came up beside me suddenly, and I think that I may have jumped. That's Greg for you, she said. We went beyond the parlor and into the dining room, past into the kitchen. And at that point, we were looping back towards the living room that was connected by way of a hallway back to the foyer and the stairs. There was a lot of creepy stuff scattered about. Red-stained cups in an old china cabinet. Dolls that had what were medical fake human eyes, to replace an eye that had been lost. Sitting on couches. Dishes in the sink that seemed to be covered in bile and mysterious chunks and actually smelled so bad that we were gagging. I don't know about the others, but my biggest scare, at least until we got to the living room, was the nasty thing coming out of the cuckoo clock. I wish I wouldn't have forgotten about devising that when we were kids. Probably something Greg had cooked up in that sick little brain of his. It was in an alcove in the kitchen above a side table. It leapt out towards me from a crooked, broken little house with a clock on its front. A figurine of a man who was so old and disfigured, it was unclear whether he was still alive. His formal but tattered coat flared out behind him in the place of wings. Instead of saying cuckoo, cuckoo, it said, leave, leave, in a strange voice. It was the kind of voice that imitated a human's, but it was in no way human. By this point, we were all getting a little angry. You could tell in our postures and the way that our voices began to sound when we made little observations. If one of us was behind all of this, it was already too much, already too far. When we got to the living room, that last room before the foyer and the stairs again, the family's personal space. Traditionally, at least by my understanding when it came to older houses, it was not the best place for guests. It was here we knew that the first puzzle was supposed to be. Curiously, we hadn't really tried to create the puzzles back then when we were kids, even though we were all intrigued by puzzles. I wondered if, even back then, that we had hoped in a dark part of ourselves that someday we might encounter this house in the flesh. Maybe we didn't want to make the actual puzzles back then, because we didn't want to know their solutions yet. I wish we had. I wish we knew all the answers before it really began. The living room furnishings were the most ordinary of the rooms that we had encountered. And yet, in the fireplace, the puzzle, that was the area where we had designated for the first puzzle. I remember circling many times around that fireplace and jotting it in myself. First floor puzzle. It almost glowed. Probably it did glow. We drew closer to the fireplace. Instead of a fire in the open firebox, there were heaps of gold coins, amber topazes, green emeralds, red rubies, and ominous-looking jewelry. I noticed a pendant of a spiky winged owl or bat with twinkling eyes. "What is?" Jennifer said. "Why is the treasure here? It should be upstairs at the very end in the attic." "We don't know what the treasure in the attic is," I said. "And we don't know what that is." "There are blocks of stone missing from the fireplace mantel," Greg observed. And sure enough, there were. Going from left to right, starting from the bottom of the mantel, the first, second, third, and 8th and 13th block were missing, up to the point where the mantel ended and the rest of the masonry began. There were large blocks of rough-hewn stone, like for something constructed in medieval or pre-medieval times. We searched the room for potential clues to the puzzle. A mildewy chase lounge with golden buttons and a battered couch and armchairs arranged in a loose circle. A side table with an ancient, ratty-looking earth globe sitting on top of it, but the globe was caved into the northeast, Alaska and much of the North Pole lost to a makeshift crater. There is a seashell beside the imperfect globe. An old desk that looked like it had been crafted in the 19th century sitting against the wall. On the desk was an empty, off-white envelope and a compass. Not the kind of compass for telling you which direction you were going, but the tool with a metal point, hinges, and a pencil that people draw circles with. The drawers in the desk were empty. Any missing blocks in the fireplace mantel mentioned earlier, the first, second, third, 8th, and 13th from left to right, starting from the bottom of the mantel. Like the other furnishings and odds and ends, like everything else outside of what was in the fireplace where the puzzle would be, we had come up with these as kids. We were looking over what we thought must be clues. Greg suggested that maybe, just maybe, we had been unconsciously trying to create and solve a puzzle even back then. I do vaguely remember us having left some blocks out of the mantle. Bizarre, almost random little details for kids to come up with. Underneath the Chase lounge chair, Patrick found the blocks of stone that were missing from the mantle. "What do you think, folks?" Greg said. "Do they go back in the mantle?" "It can't be that easy," Jennifer said. About that time, things began to take a drastic turn. Up until then, it had just been the inanimate trappings of the haunted house in there with us. I had almost forgotten that there might be someone or something else there too. The entities. I don't know how exactly to put this. It was like the air on the edges of the room began to blur or haze up. I can only imagine what was going through Jennifer and Greg and Patrick's minds, but as for me, I was hoping that it was some kind of a smoke effect. There were shapes in the haze. Already, I could tell that they were bigger than us, and they moved, strangely, in a different rhythm to our walking or shuffling, like there was a weird and elaborate jerk to the right or left between stepping, almost dance-like. Other than that, they had seemed to be clothed from head to foot in a fuzzy wet material that seemed to have a hint of other colors to it, but I couldn't determine what the other colors were. As they moved towards us slowly from the edges of the room, I pointed at them and shouted, as if trying to shout over the smoke or haze that half obscured them. "Did we come up with them?" I shouted. "Did we ever plan out the entities themselves?" "I don't know," Patrick said, his voice firm but much lower than mine. I saw that he had his hand on something in his pocket. I made a mental note to myself that we probably should play what's in my pockets if we made it to the next floor. Jennifer rubbed the back of her head as if she had been hit there. Greg was transfixed by the approaching figures. His mouth slack and his eyes glazed over. "Oh, we gotta do something," I said. "And quick." "Whatever we do," Patrick said, "we can't run. Remember the rules. They can run if we run." "Solving the puzzle wasn't supposed to be timed," I yelled. I wasn't sure whether I was yelling at the house in the haze coming towards us or my friends. It wasn't in the rules. "We changed the rules," Greg said. "We added some, but it's easy to forget. And we took out some things too. The 7 we have, the finished product, there are some things that were cut." I cast my sights about the living room. Between the clues we had, if they were clues, my friends and the entities approaching us. I was noticing more details about the entities, like how each seemed to be wearing a mask. They had to be masks. There was no way. Even at the slow rate that they were moving, I judged they might be within reaching distance by the time a couple of minutes had passed. Were there 6, no, 7 of them? I ripped my focus from them. That was hard because my mind was struggling to fit them into the context of reality. My fight or flight was confused and berserk. I wanted this all to be a joke, but my instincts said threat. We were fumbling with blocks. "Which ones do we put in?" I said. My heart roared like the fire that, in an ordinary house, might have been in the firebox of the fireplace instead of a treasure. When I glanced at that treasure again, Patrick must have noticed because he said, "The treasure's a temptation." It was almost a chant. I didn't know if he was talking about the one in the attic or the one in the fireplace before us, but I knew one thing. They were coming. At the edges of the living room, they were coming. They jerked left to right between stepping slowly but inevitably towards us. About half a dozen tall, weird white-clad figures ripped from someone else's nightmare. We didn't remember designing them, and plopped down in our childhood haunted house made real. The entities were coming for us, and we hadn't even gotten much of a start on the first puzzle. I felt betrayed by the house, betrayed by the rules. We hadn't broken any. At least I didn't think we had. While the rest of us were fumbling with these stone blocks, making half-formed guesses about which blocks to be put back into the fireplace mantle, Jennifer started to pull one out. We stopped what we were doing and gaped. It was almost right. she said as she removed the 5th block. The circle and globe clues tried to throw me off, but then I thought about how they were broken and how one of my teachers used to say spirals were like broken circles. That teacher wasn't right. Certain spirals are perfect. I used to draw spirals all the time with my compass. I would put them on my parents' old envelopes, anything that I could get my hands on, even the pages of Greg's sketchbooks. They appear in nature in things like seashells and flowers, and the best kind of spiral, the most perfect kind. It's one of the reasons I got interested in science so early on. The perfect spiral is golden, called the golden spiral when someone tries to reproduce it. Golden, like a treasure. In mathematics, this kind of spiral can be represented in something called the Fibonacci sequence. The 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 8th, 13th, and now 5th. That was the missing number. Makes up the beginning of the sequence, not counting 0 and the repeating numbers. As she was talking, something in the fireplace clicked. Then there was a stony sliding sound. The bottom of the fireplace fell out, and the treasure, gold coins, rubies, topazes, and everything plummeted. Its echoing clatter rose up a moment later. She dropped the 5th block of stone on the floor, where the others had been deposited by us. "Great," I said, "but they're still coming." The entity nearest me was about 9 feet away by now. It continued walking very slowly in its almost rhythmic stride, broken by the jerk to the left or the right. And because it was this close, and even though it was still blurred by the haze that followed them like their own private atmosphere, I could tell that its legs were not like ours. They were angled in and then angled sharply out. Maybe that's why it walked the funny way that it did. The rest of its body was very large and equally strange in arrangement. Over its body were thick, fuzzy, somewhere between wool and fur, garments of white, almost like robes, with extra colors that I couldn't pin down. As for its face or head, that I started to lose hope was just elaborately amassed. It was like its own organism. As it got closer to me, that face thing stood up, actually stood up from a curled position. Other than 2 round eyes with no irises, it was like the face thing had been sleeping on the amount of body that we might normally call the neck. As it got up, it revealed its own brighter torso and face. The round eyes never shifted while the rest of it did. The face's thing's lower legs were fused to the larger body. Layers of sickly but tightly packed muscles were on the face thing. When the arms on the face thing raised and turned over, I saw rows of jagged teeth on them. The larger limbs on its larger body began to raise themselves too, as it got even closer to me. Hands, but wider and rounder, opened with more than 5 fingers, like it was 2 organisms, maybe more beneath the robes. "No!" Greg shouted. I turned and beheld Greg speed walking into Patrick. Patrick had a handgun, probably, I thought, what he had been gripping in his pocket, and it was aimed at one of the entities. The gun fired, but it missed its mark as Greg pushed Patrick over. When Greg got back up, he had the weapon, and the already queasy feeling in my stomach intensified. And then Greg walked more quickly than I had thought him capable of, twisting between 2 entities, the gun in one hand and the newer sketchbook in the other, just missing getting snagged by a larger, strange arm, and continued on towards the back of the room. The entities were on his tail. They had turned from us, and they had picked up their pace as they pursued Greg. But they weren't running like the rules warned they would if we did. Not yet. It seemed speedwalking was fair game. Greg opened the door to the hallway leading back to the foyer and the stairs. "I'll toss it in the cubbyhole," Greg yelled as he walked rapidly out of the room. "If that doesn't do it, and if I don't make it, tell my wife and my daughter." At that moment, he had decided to slam the door behind him. Did the entities open the door like you or I would? If so, I did not hear or see it. I saw haze around them thicken, blurring to the point that they were fully obscured. And then they were gone. It wasn't electronic. Patrick growled beside me. The gun, it's mechanical and not electronic. No violation of rule number 3. You didn't have a flashlight, a laser, or anything on it, did you? I said. No, it's a standard semi-automatic handgun with no extra bells or whistles. How about a GPS tracker? Jennifer said. Ah, Patrick said. I could see his jaw grinding back and forth. Yeah, I forgot that I had one attached. Somebody at the store recommended it. The clerk yammered on and on about ringing it up for me, and I was just trying to get out of there. That thing is inconspicuous. I guess that's the point, so a would-be thief wouldn't see it. He told us that he was sorry, that he had brought that gun to protect us, that he didn't know why Greg would not let him shoot one of those entities. What if, I said, and bear with me here, what if those entities are just people in costumes with animatronics or puppetry? Expensive, sure, and surrounded by some impressive smoke and mirror stuff. And imagine, if you would, that Greg is the one who set it up. Like maybe he's the one with some rich connections, and doesn't want us to kill an actual person, while they're attempting nothing more than a prank. Not long ago, Patrick said, you were all accusing me of arranging this, which is crazy. We did this together. Guess it doesn't matter, I said. We gotta leave. Things are way out of hand. We can't leave without trying, Jennifer said to me. You know that. Think about a treasure that's worth risking our lives for. She was right. She was absolutely right. 5 floors, 5 of us. Not 4, 5. We had not talked about Sally aloud since we had gotten here, but she was on our minds. The only reason I haven't mentioned her yet is because I was waiting for the right moment. It had been Sally's idea to design this haunted house when we were young. I mentioned earlier that our main goal in making up this place and its rules when we were kids was to design a scary, dangerous house. And then it was due to our being cooped up apartment brats wanting to conjure up a house all our own. That was how it started. But then somewhere along the way, our friend Sally, who had helped us start designing the house, disappeared. Some had said that she had been abducted. Others that she had wandered out of the apartment complex and gotten lost. There were extensive searches. There were countless vigils. We believed then, because of something we had done, that it was the house that had taken her. So as kids, we had finished planning out the house and its rules after she was gone, because we wanted her back. We never openly said aloud that we thought finishing this idea that had started with her would bring her back. But it was there with us in this place that Sally used to sit. When she didn't come back, there was unspoken guilt. We tried again and again to fix the house and its rules. We made changes. We did everything short of building the house ourselves, which we might have done if we only had the resources. But we were kids. We gave up, because we didn't think there was anything else that we could do. Jennifer still calls Sally's parents every year. I don't. I don't think I ever did. When someone goes away and you can't wrap your head around it, eventually you might start to forget. Not forget them, but forget the reality. You live with the memory of them like it's a story your parents used to read to you before bed. Sally's the treasure in the attic, I said. Yeah, Jennifer said. If this isn't fake, so we should all go through with it either way. That's what Sally would have wanted, I said. She loved this stuff, probably more than Greg and the rest of us. Patrick was turned away, facing one of the boarded up windows. I wanted to turn around and ask him, point blank, which treasure he would prefer. Our lost friend, or one like the golden jewels that had just been under our noses. I also didn't want to ask him though. Not long after that, Greg returned to the living room. He made some joke about how folks like to jazz up their guns with electronics nowadays. He banked on that as soon as he'd seen Patrick pull his weapon like the popo on a perp. He clapped a hand on Jennifer's back and congratulated her on solving the puzzle, his other hand still gripping his sketchbook. And despite looking a little green in the face, he seemed alright. Like those entities hadn't gotten their weird little and weird big hands on him while he had been depositing Patrick's gun in the cubbyhole near the entrance. He asked us why we were so downtrodden after solving the first puzzle. Patrick gave him an earful about knocking him over, said that he owed him one. When we said that we had been talking about Sally, Greg looked more shaken than I had seen him since we had entered the house. Sally's disappearance had always affected him acutely, maybe even more than the rest of us. We talked about how things would only get harder and crazier, as if we had known when we were designing it as kids, that we would get this chance and that it took that much to get our friend back. And then we went over to the stairs and prepared ourselves for the second floor. We were on the stairs going up. The curvature of the stairs reminded me of the curled up head of the entity that I had seen up close downstairs. The head had uncurled itself as a body would, and then stood up on the larger body walking beneath it. I couldn't get my own head around those entities that had come out on the first floor while we had been trying to solve the first puzzle. They had come for us because Patrick had broken house rule number 3 about depositing electronics in the cubbyhole near the entrance. The entity's appearance had been difficult for me to navigate mentally. I'm afraid that difficulty has influenced how I try to put words to them. How do you describe something that has little relation to things that you've seen before, without the powers of comparison that we ordinarily have? I feel lost. If one of the 4 or 5 of us had designed those entities, I didn't know where the ideas had come from. Maybe they had been born from some of Greg's bizarre little doodles, and maybe he had been running a high fever then. Maybe we had forgotten about those particular details. To try again, what I had seen was at least 2 separate things, separate entities maybe fused together. A body and a face or head that was its own body with its own limbs. They were clothed in whitish, fuzzy robes, while the larger lower body was. The limbs of the larger body in particular were off, angled like a toy whose arms and legs had been snatched out by a child, and then put back in the wrong way. And then there was that walking they had that was rhythmic but broken. A staccato little dance step walk that got under your skin, like a bad waltz, like strange toes stomping on your feet. Waltzes and the entities pulled me over into a lane of thinking that I was trying to avoid while on the stairs. Wait. I don't see Walt, the stairman, I said. That's a relief. The entities probably only appear when we've been bad, Jennifer said. When we break a rule. As long as... Cue Walt the stairman. The rest of what Jennifer said was lost to the napalm of fear in my brain. I glimpsed an image of a large shape above the stairs hanging there. It had much longer limbs than I thought those other entities had. Its limbs were touching the walls, holding it up. It made an arc above our heads. Around her eyes then was normal, looked down upon me, a hint of blur at its edges. And then it was gone. You guys see that? I said. My breath was coming out ragged. I was sure that at any moment I might throw up. I didn't want to do it on the stairs because that might add an unnecessary slipping hazard. Save that for later. We were at the second floor landing by then, so we stopped to discuss it. They told me that they hadn't seen the entity dangling above us. Walt, the stairman, the entity whose job, according to the rules that we had made when children, was to watch over the stairs so that people didn't go up before solving the floor puzzle. Was Walt making a point? Or was what I had seen a trick of my mind? Was it both? But the longer that we were at the second floor landing, the more we knew that we had to get started. Not on the puzzle. That would come later, but too soon for comfort. First, we had to face what we knew would be a potentially dangerous floor. As kids, we had designed the first floor as a warm-up. Scary but not dangerous. At least not until you got to the puzzle. Unless you tried to solve the first puzzle or broke one of the rules, you wouldn't be risking anything down there. Not so with the second floor. I was the one who had stepped first into the second floor vestibule. Click. Onto a pressure plate. Shoot, I said. The traps. A hand grabbed my shoulder from behind me. It's alright, Greg said. That's just to get whoever's going through the house ready for some other traps. You remember? I do, Jennifer said. The first trap we made, it comes after this. Okay, I said. Sure, I recall it, but it's a little hazy. To my right, motion. There was an old record player on a stand against the wall, just like we had put into our sketchbook designs years ago. It had a big, gaudy horn on it. It's the kind of record player that I believe is called a phonograph. The record was spinning. Its needle apparatus was moving. When the needle dropped onto the record, it played us a 1910s or 1920s ragtime number. Memory, it's not as sure as destiny. I tell it to every dame I see. At that point, the needle rose and fell again. Too hard, I thought. The song went in reverse. I was reminded of that sound that I had heard at the front doorway before going into the house, with our eyes closed and our hands covering them, as the rules had instructed, when we had been waiting for whatever had opened the door for us to move away. When the song began playing again, the voice was in a much deeper, almost demonic tone. It got garbled, went into some lines about melody, and then stopped playing altogether. By that time, I had moved well off that pressure plate, and the others were standing with me in the vestibule. My heart was hammering in my chest. That's not the same song, I said. It's not the one we decided should be played when someone steps on that plate. Yeah, Jennifer said, which is kind of ironic considering the lyrics. I don't remember what the other song was, Patrick said. It was old too. Something about a person driving someone else crazy. I don't remember it either, Greg said. But it wasn't this, Patrick said. The vestibule also had paintings of flowers in various states of decay. That was right. That was the way it should be. The way that we had intended. What was also right were the two doors at the end of the little entry hallway to the second floor. We walked over to them. A door with a hook and a door with a fish on their fronts. And here's the first trap, Jennifer said. It's the... which door is it again? This is me, Patrick said. We're the fish, so we go through the fish door. I remember it because it was my idea. No, Greg said, as we were moving in that direction. It's the hook. We changed that, remember? In order to beat this house, you have to be a hook, not a fish. I took a deep breath. Are you sure, Greg? No, I'm right, Patrick said. I'm sure. We didn't change that. That was mine. I would know. Greg and Patrick were having a staring contest. We're the fish, Patrick said to him. Greg shook his head. You better be sure than I am, and I don't think you are. I was already moving towards the door with the fish on it. I kind of just wanted to end their argument, and besides that, I had a plan. I would just have the others stand far back, and I would hide myself behind and to the side of the door as I pulled it open, thus evading the trap if it was the wrong door. So I grabbed the handle of Patrick's fish door. Alright everybody, stand back, get closer to the stairs. I'll just move aside and backwards as I open the door. After they had reluctantly moved away, I yanked open Patrick's fish door. I got to the side as I said I would, and I braced myself. Nothing happened. Are we good? I said. I was lying on my friend's a better vantage point into the doorway from farther back. The others gave me the all clear. So I went around the side of the door, peered into the next room myself. It was a second-story drawing room for entertaining guests, just as we had planned. And then I turned around to face them. "Success," I said. And Greg was nearly on top of me already with that speed walk of his. He raised an arm, and I was sure I was going to get slugged, but I wasn't sure why. Instead, he grabbed the front of my shirt and pulled me back. The twang of a large spring deluge of air chased after me, and then I was on the ground, scooting away on my backside, as shards of filthy glass fell into my jeans. Standing above me was a mannequin dressed like a butler. "Refreshments?" it said in a recorded voice. It was carrying a tray full of grimy shards of glass. If I hadn't gotten out of the way, some of them might have cut me up. We had planned on that butler coming out of the wrong door to the drawing room. It was a spring-loaded mannequin bearing painful and potentially devastating little treats for the unfortunate person who opened the wrong door. I had opened that door. "Thanks, Greg," I said. I shook pieces of glass off of me as I stood up. "I really owe you one." I couldn't meet Patrick's eyes. Didn't know what to say to him. I felt bad for him. I was just appreciative that I wasn't having to worry about bleeding or an infection. "That thing must have come around the corner," I said. "Did we intend it that way?" No one answered the question, but they were happy that I was alright. We passed into the drawing room, and from there, a study. There were some pretty unsettling things in those rooms. I don't know how we devised a lot of that as kids, where it came from. In keeping with the mannequin theme, in both the drawing room and study were a bunch of mannequins seated and standing in a variety of postures. Some were missing their limbs or their heads. One held another's head in its hands. A mannequin seated at a table had a book open to pages detailing an Iron Maiden. The Iron Maiden's chest cavity open and displayed its rib-like spikes, and another device that swung people while they were upside down. I recall those being foreshadowing for future traps. Like I said, not sure where we had gotten a lot of those concepts as kids. Then we were at the library. We had an idea of what to expect. Sometimes ideas aren't nearly enough to get you ready. Jennifer opened the door and we all peeked in. We started to hold the wall. A couple of us were gripping the door like it was a branch on a cliffside. Even though we had felt we were on level ground a moment earlier, once that door was open, our perspective had changed. The wooden floor of the library sloped down at a very sharp angle. Beyond, towards the back of the room, there was a pit. It looked to be roughly 10 feet in breadth, with a width that went across the entire room. Against the back walls, massive bookshelves leaned over the pit, secured in place by things that, even with my experience in industrial and commercial building construction, I had no idea could exist. Unless they had been made of metal and welded in place or secured with hidden bracing. In other words, those bookshelves and their books should have fallen into that pit. They were that big. It didn't make sense how tall this room was, and how deep the pit seemed to be. The library should have been directly over the kitchen and some of the other first-floor rooms, which had no indication of a pit. But we had designed the library that way as kids, so here it was. Slapping us in the face, metaphorically, was this facetious banner that we had made to stretch across much of the room. It was the kind of banner you might see presenting a library's book fair. We used to love book fairs when the library got brand new books just released, and you had the nice smelling catalogs to get you ready for when the days came, and you could go into the library and pick up the cool new books that you had ordered. Anyway, instead of book fair, the banner read, "Knowledge is slippery." We had laughed about it then, thought that we were clever. We didn't feel that way now. I mentioned earlier that we should have been better prepared. File that under the understatement category. We had no mountain climbing gear with us, which is probably what we needed to get across the steeply sloped flooring of the library and to the door on the other side of the room. So here's what we did to get across the library. We held hands and we lowered ourselves on the angled floor, like we had made a rope of ourselves. Greg had to shove his new sketchbook beneath his pants belt. The person or people at the front looked for things against or near the front wall of the library to grasp with their free hand. Those in the back held on to what we had already found. We used our leg strength and the bond of our hands. We used niches or grooves in the floorboard, the baseboards, that tried to break off in our grip. A desk that was heavy but not so heavy it didn't slide, a little if it pulled too much. We used trust. It was hard. I think that it would have been much easier with 5 people, with Sally, but the 4 of us made it across, from the left to the right side of the room. The pit had been dark, whispering promises, things to come, but we hadn't fallen in. After the library, we were looping back around towards these stairs. We knew that this time, we had to solve the puzzle before a path would open back up to the stairway. If we wanted to go back, it would have had to go back through the library. The hall from the library bisected 3 rooms, or chambers as we had labeled them. They were identical in size, so we couldn't remember which one had the puzzle. We opened the doors to the first 2 even though we figured the puzzle was probably in the last one. The sights in those first 2 rooms were revolting. Bones littered the floor of the first one, what looked to be real animal bones, or at least very good replicas. In the next room, these same exact bones were in these same exact positions. We checked multiple times, despite some of us gagging at the sight and smell of the second room in particular. But they had more meat in them, like time had been wound back. Flies were buzzing around the bones with meat in them, actual living flies. I knew they were alive because I had spotted one to make sure that it wasn't some kind of a special effect. I beheld its twitching, crumpled body in my palm. This was important. Flies might seem like a small detail, but other than the entities, this was the first time that we had encountered something in the house that might actually be alive. It would not be the last. In the final room of the hallway, we expected the second floor puzzle. Inside and in the middle of the room was a circular staircase leading up. There was a trap door above it. Huh, Patrick said. This isn't right, I said. There are no other stairs in the house. There shouldn't be. We can't go up these stairs either until we have solved the puzzle, Patrick said. Rule number 6. Walt the stairman will come for us if we climb the stairs before solving the puzzle. Guys, Jennifer said, this is the puzzle. We don't remember another staircase being in the house because we didn't put one in, but we also never decided on what the puzzle should be. They could be anything, including a staircase. That's right, Greg said. The puzzle was supposed to be in the center of one of these rooms, and voila, the center of the room. We should brainstorm a little here, Jennifer said, since we've got the time. We glanced up at the clocks against the walls. You could hear them ticking in unison like the marching of an army. There had to be at least a dozen of them. It looked to be half of one wall and half on the opposite. They were all plain white plastic analog clocks. The first floor puzzle, she said, was related to me. There were 5 of us. 5 floors, 5 puzzles. I'm guessing that each puzzle is related to one of us. So the question burning a hole through the front and back of my mind is, who here has a thing for stairs? Other than Walt? Greg said, laughing harshly. We gave him sour looks. I used to like those, Patrick began. What are they called? Impossible staircases. You know, the ones that are represented in art and seem to go on forever. It's like they descend and go around, and then they're ascending back to where they began. They're called Penrose stairs, Greg said. His arms were folded and he was sitting on the only bed in the room. What? I considered myself something of an artiste, you know, before I lost my innocence to working on medical cream and potato chip advertisements. So, right now, I said, what we have is possible stairs. Maybe we gotta turn them into impossible stairs. Let's do that, Jennifer said. until we come up with something better. Greg looked up, still sitting on the bed. Hey, sounds good to me. Unless we fail because it's the wrong way to go about it. Or maybe it's right, I don't know. Guess we're on our way to finding out. Alright, Patrick said. Sounds like a decent start. Make the possible stairs impossible. I wish we had an axe or a hammer in here. Yeah, I said. We could go to work on those stairs. We searched the room for other potential clues to the second floor puzzle. There wasn't much in the room, but we had to be thorough. Here are all the clues that we gathered. An early 20th or 19th century looking circular staircase into the middle of the room. It went up to a closed trapdoor. The staircase had 14 total stairs. A bed with plain white sheets and comforter. There is a shoe print on the left and right pillow, going in opposite directions. A compact extension ladder under the bed that, upon fully opening, could reach the top step of the staircase. 14 clocks. Analog clocks with the hands. 7 were on the left wall and 7 were on the right wall. Upon closer inspection, they seemed to be scuffed up, as if someone had stepped on them. But the strangest thing was that the clocks on the right wall were actually running counterclockwise. That was it. Once again, I found myself amazed that, as children, we had come up with clues for a puzzle that years ago we had seemed to have no inkling of. And now here we were trying to solve it with those clues years later. At this point, we didn't have the entities moving towards us because we hadn't broken a rule, not like with the first floor puzzle. However, I think we all felt the pressure of time on our shoulders, oppressive. Maybe it was the ticking of all those clocks, or how these stairs at the center of the room beckoned to us.